welcome Butch Patrick. Yeah.
Okay. Munster mask. We're all safe.
Nice. So, yeah, why don't you let people in as well, Scott, as we're doing this. We got Scott Ryder here. We got Robert Patrick. Welcoming everybody to our second Chuck Jones Creativeside Chat. And we thought about doing fireside chats, but right now, it's warming up, so we figured that the Creativeside Chat would be much better. And looking at Chuck's history, that's the whole point of these Creativeside Chats, is to kind of delve into creative people and how people have lived creative lives, or people who have worked with Chuck. I grew up with Chuck. I think we all grew up with Chuck to some extent, but it's great to have you here. And why don't I throw it over? And I know that there's going to be questions coming up throughout, which we'll see if we can take that. But welcome. Maybe you start off with just a little bit about yourself and how
my name is Butch Patrick, and I was born in 1953. So I had a wonderful window of life to grow up in, a little bit of the 50s, and I started working in the movie business in 1960 to 61 as a 7-year-old little kid actor who stumbled into it. Never really wanted to be an actor. I don't think any 7-year-old kid really wants to be an actor. They kind of sort of happenstance situations, but they took my little sister up to a photo shoot for print modeling, and I didn't have a babysitter that day, and my mom drugged me along. And after he was done taking photos of my sister, he says, he's kind of got a look about him. And the gentleman's name was Amos Carr. He was a very famous Hollywood photographer for kids. So he took a picture of me and he put it in the window of his studio up on Hollywood Boulevard. And a producer and a director, it's not quite the Lana Turner Schwab's Pharmacy story, but it's close. A director and the producer are walking by and they spotted the picture and they said, "We would like to reach that kid." And he goes, "Well, he's not an actor." They go, "Well, do you have his number or not?" So they reached out to me, and it turned out that I got this little B movie called The Two Little Bears with Eddie Albert and Jane Wyatt, Soupy Sales, and Brenda Lee was my 15-year-old sister, and Nancy Culp. Just a really good little B movie cast. And at the end of the 6 weeks of shooting, I'd already picked up General Hospital, and I picked up a Kellogg's Cornflakes commercial, and I was off to the races, so to speak. And I had a knack for it. Came easily to me. Never really wanted to be an actor, but after that, the Real Mccoys came along, and I kept very, very busy through the 60s until I was about 21 years old in 1974 when I phased out of it myself. I wanted to be a race car driver, and so that was and you got to remember the 60s and the 70s was a very different time for everything. So my focus was never really on the business. I just was looking at it as a way to finance hopefully a race car driving career, which never really materialized.
Did you really, did you actually race, and did you grow up sort of, when did you have that love for speed?
Well, as a kid, it's funny when I go around today and I see these kids, bicycles wearing helmets and knee pads and elbow pads. And, growing up when I grew up, it was much different. We were taking our lumps on mini bikes and Stingrays and falling off roofs of construction sites, and just, it was a whole different world. But as a kid, I had slot cars, which I think everybody that grew up in the 50s and 60s knew what slot cars were. And then I had a huge slot car track, and I built my own. And then we had dirt bikes. And then one thing led to another. When I was 16 years old in 1969, my first car was a Mach 1 that I treated myself to. And at that time, I was getting into drag racing with a friend of mine who went to high school with me, was working on a funny car, a Roland Leong's Hawaiian. And through him, I met Jack Crispin, and who I'm still friends with the family. Jack and Dee have passed. But I started going to a lot of drag racing when the funny cars were just being introduced to the mix. And that's what I really wanted to do, was be a drag racer, because I think everybody who's ever burnt out with a little water on their tires, has got a little drag racing in them. And that was what I was hoping to do. But unfortunately, the cars were much more expensive, and I had spent a lot of money at the beach, and I couldn't finance it.
So where did you go? Obviously the Munsters, probably the thing you're most remembered for. How did that come about? Obviously, after how long were you on General Hospital for, by the way?
I was on the very first year for the first 10 episodes.
Okay.
I was Dr. Hardy's girlfriend's son. So, you know, John Bernardino would walk me in and drop me off, and I'd say my little 1 or 2 lines and walk off the set. But it was to set up scenes. But it was General Hospital the first year.
That's pretty cool. So how long after that was the Munsters, and how did, I mean, were you up against other people? Were you part of a group?
That's how, it's amazing how that happened as well. As I went on to do a year of the Real McCoys. The last year it was on when they had gotten rid of the family unit. They just had Amos, Pepina, and Luke. And I was the love interest son of Luke. They brought a woman in that got the farm next door. So I would ride my little pony over and visit him a lot. And I did like 8 episodes of My 3 Sons. And after that, I went with my grandmother back to live in Illinois when I was in the 5th grade. I spent a lot of time with her crossing the country, which later in this show, I'll explain to you that's why I enjoy travel so much. But I was living in Illinois when they cast the Munsters, and they had actually cast it with a woman named Joan Marshall as Phoebe, which was the mom, not Lily. And they also had a kid named Happy Durman playing Eddie. And the networks weren't happy with Joan and Happy. So they asked to recast it with Yvonne DeCarlo. And Yvonne DeCarlo came in with the star power name. And they flew me, my agent convinced them to fly me in from Illinois for a screen test. I bypassed the whole interview process and went directly in front of a camera. Wow. And they told me not to go home. Don't go back to the airport, make arrangements to report to work. And that's what I did.
Nice. Now, was the whole team already on board when by that time, Yvonne DeCarlo, were you sort of a final peg in there? Or was
me and Yvonne both were. I tested with her.
Okay.
So it was me and her at the last minute. The thing with Yvonne DeCarlo was Fred and Al didn't think she could do comedy. They thought she was a bad choice. But as it turned out, it was a really brilliant choice because not only did she do comedy well, but she was actually a very identifiable movie star name that brought a lot of credibility to television. Because back in those days, most movie stars didn't do TV. Yeah.
It was a long time before movie stars did TV. There was certainly a different era back then.
You know, who broke that wall down was actually Elizabeth Taylor when she did General Hospital.
I didn't even know she did General Hospital.
Yeah, she did. That's when literally she sort of, well, if Liz can do it, we can do it.
Nice. So how many years was the Munsters filmed?
We were on a brief 2 years, 70 episodes. Back in the mid-'60s, it wasn't uncommon to have popular shows with 2 to 3 year short runs. It was Star Trek, Gilligan's Island, the Addams Family. A lot of shows had short but successful runs.
Very obviously, a few years later, everybody's still watching the Munsters. That's for sure. So, I mean, how did that prepare you for, you know, the future, and how did that roll in? Because it was right after that you met Chuck, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. I had finished the Munsters, went back into the school system, the public school system in the 7th grade. I always was busy. I was over at Disney, which that, you know, has always been the gold standard for kids to do Disney work. So I spent a year and a half over at Disney doing some World of Colors and a couple features and guest starring roles. I could ride a horse, so I did a lot of Westerns, which was fun. My 3 Sons, when I was a little older, I did a lot of My 3 Sons as Ernie's best friend, as a reoccurring regular. And in that period, the Monkees Christmas show came along, and Chuck Jones and Chuck's movie, The Phantom Tollbooth, came along. And those two, the Christmas show with the Monkees was because the Monkees were so big, but the Phantom Tollbooth, it was narrowed down. I went on a lot of interviews for that. It was about 6 callbacks, if I remember correctly. And it got down to me and Sheldon Collins, which was a friend of mine who I had worked at Disney with. And he and I were the last 2 choices. And honestly, I really, really tried my best to get that part. Normally, I kind of had whatever happens, give it your best shot. But that one, I really put a little bit of more oomph into it. And I was really happy that I did.
Well, what was it about that you say that you put a little more oomph into it? What was it about that project that got your attention early and you wanted to work for?
Well, I was familiar with doing voiceover work and doing looping and stuff with the Munsters, and I was really, really wanted to spend some time with Mel Blanc and June and Dawes and Hans and all the A-listers that Chuck corralled to get involved with this movie, and Chuck himself. But it was one of those deals where this was going to be something very, very, very special. And I knew it, and I wanted to be part of it.
That's great. So, I mean, did you record with any of the other voice artists during?
Yeah.
Yeah. So not like now where they just bring in and run lines. There was actually back and forth with Mel and June and the rest of them.
It was the one thing I remember the most was when the gentleman was singing "Time Ticks Hastily Away." That was one of the deals that was really, really funny, because when you're not hearing the headphones and you just have somebody singing without any accompaniment, it's pretty funny. And the fact that I had a chance, and it took about 2 years to complete production of the Phantom Tollbooth, because they would do it in stages. So every few months I would get called back to go back to the studio to do a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. So it was really cool to see the progress and to be part of it for, like I say, a year and a half or so.
Did they do the live action first? Because that my favorite part was that transition time. So
yes,
you had the beginning and the ending, which first of all, I think Phantom Tollbooth is one of the most brilliant stories. And then the adaptation for it that Chuck did with, like you said, the team that he brought back together with Ken Harris and Ben Washam and Maurice Noble and all those guys from Warner Brothers came back and did the only feature film that Chuck ever made.
Yeah.
You know, it really was an amazing message in there. And I remember growing up, obviously seeing it a lot, because we had 35 millimeter prints that Chuck would bring everywhere we go, 16 millimeter print that I remember taking to camp with me when I was 11. And so we, you know, over and over and over again. But, you know, was it the process of it with Chuck, the live action? Because I think Chuck directed the live action, right?
Yeah, we went to San Francisco and spent, I think we're up to about 3 or 4 days doing the live action, and that's where he does the cameo where he's on the cable car with me.
Yeah,
does his Hitchcock.
It was very good. Was that beginning, or was that later in the production, in the sequence of filming?
What was that?
Was it one of the first things that you did?
We did the live action first. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that started the whole process. We went up there, and that was another interesting thing too, because it's hard to explain the 60s if you weren't there. But I was a very old 12, 13, 14-year-old. I was very much an adult at that time, even though I looked younger, and my biological age might have been 12 or 13, but I was like 18 or 19, and I looked about 9 or 10. So it was perfect for Hollywood. But when we were up in San Francisco and, you know, Nob Hill, we were like at Haight-Ashbury, which is like, you know, ground zero for the hippie psychedelic movement, the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, all these people, that was happening back then, right at that time. And to be involved in a great movie and a production and being doing this and being doing that, it was just a wonderful experience, not only being in the movie, but being around the whole nucleus of that scene. Which I was very interested in it, and I couldn't have asked for a better time.
So you were about 15, 16, 17 at that time during the production? Because I think
No, I wasn't. I was younger. I was 14.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that was early on. So that was like 67, 68 that you were up there doing that. So yeah, it was a great, so I always think back, your transition from live action going into the toll booth, and then kind of going back and forth between, and you know, the animated foot or hand coming out one way and whatnot.
The foot, the hand, right.
Had you done animation before? I know you've done voiceover, but
no, I don't believe so. I believe that was pretty much it. They had made some animated, you know, Munsters stuff, but I wasn't associated with it. You know, I had nothing to do with it. It was just licensed out through Universal, and but no, that was pretty much it for me the first time.
So I'm just curious. I wasn't there. I mean, maybe we met at some point during that production, but I would have been, you know, 7 or 8 or whatever it was. But do you remember that particular scene? I've always wanted to ask you, transitioning and having Chuck direct you during that, him knowing what the animation was going to be like?
I remember, yes, you know, it's a little hazy, but I do remember a couple things from the live action situation. Number one, I remember standing on the thing spinning around. I remember that a lot, you know, because you had to stay centered and, you know, you spin, 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 and then they speed it up. I remember doing the hand and the leg. And I was always, one of the things about being a kid actor is one of the reasons why I probably did as well as I did, even though I never had an acting lesson or any of that. I could take direction well. And if my instincts were pretty sound, and I usually, what they were looking for, I was pretty close to what they wanted, or maybe I was even spot on at times. But if you're not, the trick is you need to adjust to what they want. And I was good at that. So one of the things they that probably came around was Chuck was easy to deal with, and he was very, you know, you have to have sort of a way of communicating with the kid at a kid's level somewhat. I mean, you know what I mean? Yeah. You can't really be, and Chuck wouldn't have done this, but some directors can't direct kids. They're like angry, or they're authoritarian or whatever. And the good directors that are kid directors work with a kid because they know how to get the most out of him. And Chuck had that natural gift of he's easy to work with. So between me having a pretty good instinct and him being able to work with, we got along swimmingly.
Was he pretty involved with how you would deliver lines and how you would do things, or just sort of like, here's kind of the theme and let you go at it?
He pretty much let me go at it, and apparently what I was doing was satisfactory, because I can't recall a whole lot of changing the deal, the delivery. So luckily, I think that's why when you actually go through the screen test process, they try to get the kid that, you know, they don't want to be sort of like learning on the fly. When you go through a screen test situation, which I've been through several, they have a pretty good feel of how you're going to be delivering the lines. And that's one of the reasons they hire you, is because they like your particular style.
Nice. Okay. Well, one of the things, and I will say that Chuck was adamant about, as far as his creative process and his team process, was that he said that the best thing about him and his talent was that he was able to bring people who were better at what they did than he could ever be. And so he certainly surrounded himself with great talent. So it's kind of, if Chuck were sitting here, he'd say, well, he was obviously the best one, and I knew it. And so I trust people. And that's what he would talk about, that June Foray would say the same thing, that do a line, you know, he'd give her the sort of general direction, but just let her go. And then, you know, she told the story of, well, don't you want to do it again? He goes, no, that was good. And then, yeah, you know, unlike other studios that would be like 20 takes and we'll take the best one, he just like, no,
you know, actors love to work for a director like that. Clint Eastwood's that way. He's very much, that's done, we got it, move on. And then Stanley Kubrick is known for 171 takes, and you know, they're so extremely different. But as an actor, you always love a director that gets what he wants, knows what he wants, and moves on afterwards, which is great.
Yeah, trusting your talent. So, you know, the whole process of creating a creative endeavor, which obviously filmmaking and acting and animation and art and everything is, you know, Chuck talked about the creative spirit or the creative intelligence in people, and looking for those inspirations. And, you know, how do you, because you're obviously a creative guy, you continue to do new things and have your whole life. How do you kind of work in a creative space, and how do you get, you know, sort of that creative part of you out?
You know, the thing for me, I was never going to be an actor. I used to tell people when I was 11, 12 years old that as soon as I turn 18, I'm out of here. You guys work too hard. This is not a career for me. This is just something I happen to be having a knack for, you know, for hitting my marks and memorization and doing what I do. But it was never a career. So I was actually a regular guy who lived at the beach, who rode bikes and dirt bikes. All I wanted to do was be a regular kid. I really did. And I didn't dislike what I was doing, but I knew it wasn't a calling and it was never going to be a career. So I kind of played it like a regular. If you look back at a lot of my roles, I play myself, and that's what they were looking for. Yeah. I got very, very lucky. I had enough talent to go outside my comfort zone when needed. But luckily for me, a lot of the roles and a lot of the writing and the scripts that I was good for fit right into like a regular kind of guy thing, and that's what they were looking for, and that's what I was.
So, yeah, I get that you were, you know, playing yourself, but Eddie Munster is pretty unique character. And, you know, how did
But
you
that was the
get
makeup.
that?
I played Eddie Munster as a regular 10-year-old kid. That's why they hired me, to be honest with you, because the previous kid was playing him very angry and screechy and like a wolf man, and I came in and played him. I just happened to be a regular kid with pointed ears. They stopped production after the first day and said, he's not believable enough to be the offspring of Herman and Lily. We need to make him more unusual. And they added the widow's peak and the dark eyebrows. And after that, then I became Eddie Munster, but I still played myself. I just happened to be in makeup with a funny suit.
How long was the makeup? How long?
Mike Westmore. I was talking about being around quality people like your granddad. Mike Westmore, I was his first ward. He was an apprentice, and he would put my ears and my makeup on. Then he would do Pat Priest, Marilyn Munster, and send us off. And he'd go up to the lab to make all the headpieces and ears for the next day. But I was his first person that he had to take care of when he first got into the makeup business. And we're still friends.
That's good. Now, we're going to take a little bit of questions, but I wanted to, so I've been following you. You know, you've got a new project. How long have you been doing the Coast to Coast?
The Coast to Coast came about last October. We started it. And a friend of mine who's a big YouTuber, you know, we're friends, and he's a filmmaker, said, you know, if I send you some interesting things to do and show you what to do, will you take these videos and I'll edit them and I'll produce them and I'll post them and we'll create a Coast to Coast channel for you. And that's what I've been doing. So it's been about, this last 2 months we haven't done anything, but we did 14 of them in about 3 months.
Where have you been?
Where have I been with them?
Yeah.
I did some, the first one I did was on Francis Farmer, which was up in Indiana. And then I did one on my stepdad, the ball player, who was buried next to Roger Maris up in Fargo. Then I did one at the Indianapolis Raceway. Then I went up in a B-24 Liberator. I drove an Indy car. Let me see. I did one on the Little People in Hollywood. I did one on Jackie Coogan. I don't have a list in front of me, but that's the kind of stuff. Some of it is profiles of people. Some of it is situations and experiences, and others are just. I did the Ava Gardner Museum up in her hometown at her cemetery, and her world and her life was good. So yeah.
Okay, tell me about the IndyCar. I know obviously the passion of racing. That must have been a thrill.
A friend of mine in St. Louis got me a chance to do a 2-seater ride, which was fine. I rode along. But when I went to Indianapolis, the gentleman that has the IndyCar Racing League there hired me at Halloween. And I put my cars on display because I am a Munster coach and a Dragula. And during that time, he said, come back in the spring and I'll let you drive an IndyCar. So obviously I went back in the spring, and not only did I get to do a 2-seater again, but I actually drove an IndyCar. And at Indy is a little bit different than at Gateway Raceway in St. Louis. It's a bigger track, and it's Indianapolis. You know, it's like, there's nothing like driving an IndyCar at Indy.
That must have been a good time.
It was cool.
So I just, before we go to questions, which I know can come up at any point in the chat, there's a guy that we're working with now, Ben Olson, out of Schaumburg, Illinois, and he started the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity out there 4 years ago, and has been all over doing wonderful things, huge events and whatnot. But he said that he actually met you and spent an evening with you, and maybe you can unmute Ben, Scott. And I don't remember all the details, Ben, but you're on here and said you spent the evening out there. So this is Ben out of Schaumburg, Illinois. You were out there for what, Ben?
So
what were you out there for?
Butch came in for an a la carte event at Excalibur in downtown Chicago. It's a Halloween costume judging contest.
Uh-huh.
You were at the Aloft Hotel, and I had a buddy of mine who said, hey, man, I need some help. I've got to go pick up, like, Butch Patrick. He's Eddie Munster. He's doing this whole thing. I got to go do some other stuff, and I need somebody else with me. And he was a smaller guy. He goes, I need a bigger guy. I said, he goes, what are you doing, like, now? I'm like how now? He's like, I can be outside your door in 5 minutes. So he picked me up. We went over to your hotel. I helped you find the pencil for you were doing your, eyebrow and stuff. And you had the ears and everything. We sat in, and I remember, looking up some information on you before we took a drive downtown. Cause I'm like,
I remember that.
kind of be terrible if I didn't know anything about him and we just sat there in the car. So, and I don't, for the life of me, I don't exactly remember what it was. Something around, working with children's books or something to that effect. But I don't remember exactly what we had talked about, but I looked up some things.
Yeah.
And we went through and had a great conversation all the way down. You couldn't have been a nicer person.
Oh,
and
thanks.
we got into the back entrance of the whole place, and you had a crowd. So it was just making sure nobody did what they weren't supposed to do.
I remember that evening. I do. I remember making myself up.
That's awesome.
So it was a trip and a half to sit there in the hotel while you're doing your thing to get ready, and I'm just like,
good to see you again.
Right now. So
yeah. So it's funny how certain things come back around, and we are. Ben is our representative in the Midwest for Center for Creativity, and done things with baseball games and basketball games and Comic-Cons, and obviously things have changed and gone virtual, and like we've got Jonathan out of London. A lot of our virtual classes have gone around the world already. So I'm going to open it up, and if you've got a question, go down into the chat area, and just if you want to ask Butch a question. Let's see, I got a new message down here that says, what famous TV or film role did you want? Oh, what role did you want but didn't work out for whatever reason?
Well, I wanted to be in Summer Magic at Disney to meet Haley Mills, and I didn't get it. And that kind of bummed me out. But the biggest mistake I ever made in Hollywood was a unknown director named George Lucas came out to Hermosa Beach in 1971. I had hair down to here, my surfboard under my arm, and I just gotten out of the ocean, and he tried to convince me to cut my hair for a little movie that he was doing about kids in 1962 up in Modesto. I said, I stopped him right there. I'm not cutting my hair for anybody. And 2 years later, I went and saw American Graffiti and cried. I could have had Richard Dreyfuss's part had I wanted to cut my hair.
Oh, geez. Well,
every actor in Hollywood has one of those stories.
Yeah, I'm sure. So other questions. So what was it like? I'm just looking at a private message to me. What was it like to work with Yvonne DeCarlo? I know you talked about it at the beginning, but maybe someone came in, and the other people on that show, as far as learning about both acting and professionalism. It's kind of garbled, but go ahead.
The 2 years of the Munsters was a very instrumental time. Actually, 11 and 12 years old in any young boy's life is pretty much a very big window to go through. And the fact that not only was I at Universal Studios where I could go run amok whenever I wasn't working and go exploring for fun, which was a lot of fun, but I was working with some of the best talent in Hollywood. And Fred Gwynn and Al Lewis were from New York, and Yvonne DeCarlo was a movie star from locally. And she literally was like my mom, because I was living with my uncle. My mom was in DC, and I was flying back to visit them once a month, but I didn't have my family. I was pretty much, I hired a woman to take me to work every day, and I would stay with my uncle. So Yvonne literally was like a TV mom and a surrogate mom to me. But as far as learning about things, Fred Gwynn and I, we became a good father and son team, and they wrote a lot of scripts that featured Eddie and Herman. I would always offer him up to do stuff, and he would never want to disappoint his son. And a lot of these scripts got written with father and son episodes, because they knew I could handle the dialogue, and they liked the way it was working out. He taught me a lot about acting techniques. Grandpa Al Lewis, on the other hand, he taught me about a lot about life experiences and this and that, and took the time to toss a baseball with me or a frisbee and this and that. And that was nice of him. So between the two of them and Yvonne, I had a really nice, good balance of people. And both Marilyns were friends of mine. I had a huge crush on Beverly Owen, the first Marilyn. And she actually took me to go see Mary Poppins at the Grauman's Chinese Theater, the premiere. So I like to think of her as my first date, setting the bar very high.
Yeah, who didn't have a crush on her? That's for sure. So, hey, what about George Barris? I got another question. Tell me about Munsters cars.
There's a lot of people, wonder why the show is so popular, and you have the obvious reasons with the talent. But the Munster coach and the Dragula and George Barris in general, his shop was less than a mile away. my routine on every Wednesday afternoon, I would get a long lunch and I would go to my favorite little hobby shop to pick up some slot car stuff. I would go by my favorite hot dog stand, which happened to be right across the street from George Barris' shop. And then I would go over to George's shop and see what he was up to, where I would see the likes of Sinatra and Elvis and Sonny and Cher picking up their cool custom rides, because although he was making custom cars for the Munsters at other places, he was customizing everybody in Hollywood's personal vehicles. So he was like the who's who guy to go to. And he and I became friends, and we remained friends until his passing.
He just passed away recently in the last few years, right? Yeah.
It's, 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years this October.
That's amazing. So obviously your passion for driving and racing and whatnot, you had an affinity for vehicles as well.
I couldn't have asked for a better childhood. Literally, I was working in the coolest things. My stepfather, my mom married, was a professional baseball player. He was Mickey Mantle's roommate. He came to the Angels. I got to go to the ballpark when I had time and go shag flies with professional baseball players, and then go work at the studios with the likes of your grandfather and the Munsters and Disney. And I really very blessed.
Well, I got to say, the time that we have spent together, and you were so gracious with your giving of time, coming to the galleries and coming to, events for the Center for Creativity and whatnot, from an early age and early time that we met, you've always been so supportive. And I just wanted to say thank you here in this environment in front of everybody, that you're just, as Ben said, couldn't be a nicer guy. And that's always good in an arena like Hollywood. So
thank you very much. I just, like I say, I never really got wrapped up in the Hollywood thing. I enjoy it. I have a lot of friends in it, but it was just never really a call. I mean, in hindsight, I probably should have been a location scout and stayed on the perimeters of the business, but you can't tell an 18-year-old kid anything. You know that.
You can't cut your hair.
Yeah, I wouldn't cut my hair. Oh my God.
No, that is awesome. Well, I thank you for coming, and it doesn't look like we've got any other questions right here. Hopefully everybody had a great time. And so appreciate you spending the time with us.
No problem. Looking forward to it. By the way, I'm going to be doing some 50th anniversary screenings of the movie. I will let you know and try to get you out to some.
Excellent. Oh, wait, we got Ben who's got one more question.
Sure.
Yeah, as long as we're okay. Ben, go ahead and either type it in or
there he is.
Go ahead.
I'll just unmute myself. So I loved what I remember from the conversation we have are these creative endeavors that you wanted to go out. And is there a project, and I think I remember asking you this one question, is there a project that you really want to work on of your own that you're like, man, if I could do something right now, whether it's film, whether it's, book, I really want to do this.
There actually is. There is one, aside from my personal stuff. About 20 years ago, I commissioned a script to be written about the life and times of my friend Jack Crispin, who I spent all that time in the drag races with. And his daughter, who is now a very influential lady in drag racing and a power broker, contacted me yesterday because she's got a whole bunch of old clippings about her dad in the late 50s and early 60s that I was going over. When I presented this the first time around, I was trying to make it about him and Dee as the first family of drag racing. And lo and behold, when I started reading the articles, I saw 1963 and 1962, and it triggered the American Graffiti thing in my brain. Where were you in 62? So I reached out to them and I said, I think where we went wrong with this the last time was instead of trying to get Tim Allen to produce it and go to Warner Brothers or whatever, she knows Clint Eastwood. And I said, Clint loves American heroes. I mean, if you could possibly get anybody in the world to make a movie about the late 50s and the early 60s and the inaugural season of NHRA drag racing, which Jack Crispin won, and his storyline, but instead of making it about him, let's make it about all the characters that were around that period and all the nicknames and the Fast Eddie Sharpmans and the Dino Don Nicholsons and the Jungle Jim Liebermans and all the Snake and the Mongoose, all these guys that were there at the beginning of NHRA. And Jack it'll be more like Jack and his buddies as opposed to being the Jack Crispin story. And we got on with that, and I got John Schneider on the phone, who is Bo Duke. And he is a big gearhead guy, and it looks like we made some progress in maybe resurrecting the Jack Crispin story under a new template of more of a what's the word I'm looking for? Ensemble cast.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, good question, Ben. And the only other one was, who was the baseball player that was married to your mom?
Ken Hunt. He actually tried acting. He was in Herman the Rookie. He played the catcher that said, "No, no, not me, Leo. I'm going back to the minors."
That's awesome. That is awesome. All right. Thank you again. I appreciate you being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you at another event when we all get back together again.
All righty. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.